Over 70 cents of every dollar Canada spends on its military will no longer flow to the United States. That single sentence, delivered calmly by Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney in Brussels, quietly marked the end of a defense relationship that had shaped North America since the Second World War. No threats, no posturing, no negotiations left open. Just a decision, already signed, already locked in, already moving billions of dollars away from American defense contractors and into Europe. For decades, Washington assumed Canada's loyalty was automatic. Shared borders, shared airspace, shared command structures, shared enemies. But loyalty built on habit is fragile, and habit doesn't survive humiliation. On December 1st, 2025, while Americans were distracted by holiday sales and end-of-year politics, Canada became the first non-European nation to formally enter the European Union's Security Action for Europe initiative. SAFE is not symbolic. It is a €150 billion defense financing system designed to rebuild Europe's military capacity without relying on American suppliers. Membership grants access to low-interest EU-backed loans, guaranteed market access across 27 countries, and strict participation caps for non-members. The United States is not a member. That cap matters. Under SAFE rules, non-signatory countries can participate in no more than 35% of any single defense project. Translation: American companies can no longer dominate Canadian procurement. For the first time since the 1940s, Canada is building a defense system designed from the ground up to avoid American dependence. Carney described the world as dangerous and divided. The phrasing sounded diplomatic. It wasn't. Everyone knew what he meant. The danger wasn't Moscow. It wasn't Beijing. It was unpredictability from the country Canada had trusted most. To understand why this moment matters, you have to understand what Canada and the United States used to be. These were not just allies. They were fused systems. NORAD integrated their air defense. NATO aligned their forces. Five Eyes merged intelligence. Canadian pilots flew American aircraft. Canadian officers trained on American systems. Canadian procurement fed American factories. That integration was treated as permanent, until it wasn't. The rupture didn't begin in Brussels. It began with rhetoric, tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, public threats, jokes about annexation, calling Canada the 51st state, suggesting its elected leader should become a governor. For American audiences, it played as bravado. For Canadians, it sounded like something far older and far more dangerous. When a neighbor 10 times your size starts mocking your sovereignty, you don't laugh. You reassess. Mark Carney understood that shift better than anyone. When he ran for Prime Minister in early 2025, his campaign centered on one argument: Canada's dependence on the United States had become a liability, not because America was weak, but because it was volatile. He didn't promise confrontation. He promised insulation. The election wasn't close. Canadians didn't just vote for Carney. They voted for distance. Europe noticed. The European Union had its own problem. The war in Ukraine exposed a harsh truth. Europe could not sustain modern warfare without American supply chains. Stockpiles ran dry. Production lagged. Decision-making slowed. Washington's support was critical, but conditional. Europe needed autonomy, and autonomy requires factories, financing, and partners. Canada checked every box: advanced manufacturing, skilled labor, political motivation, and now a reason to break free. For Europe, bringing Canada into SAFE solved multiple strategic problems at once. It expanded production capacity without internal competition. It created transatlantic supply chains independent of U.S. control. And it sent a clear signal that American dominance was no longer the only option. For Canada, the benefits were immediate: access to billions in financing, entry into European defense markets previously closed, freedom to evaluate non-American systems without political pressure. For decades, the idea of Canada buying European fighters was considered unthinkable, not because they were inferior, but because Washington wouldn't tolerate it. That calculation changed overnight. Canada is now openly reviewing its commitment to the F-35 program, a deal valued at roughly $50 billion. European alternatives are suddenly viable: Swedish Gripen aircraft, French Rafales, the Eurofighter Typhoon. These aren't backup plans. They're serious contenders. Backed by European financing, American firms cannot match. And it doesn't stop with jets. Submarines, anti-submarine platforms, drones, secure satellite communications, Arctic surveillance systems. Entire procurement categories once assumed to belong to U.S. firms are now competitive. In Washington, the scale of the fallout is only beginning to register. Historically, Canada spent around 70% of its defense budget on American systems. That revenue supported entire divisions inside major contractors, maintenance contracts, training programs, software updates, parts supply, decades of guaranteed income built on the assumption that Canada had no alternative. That assumption is gone. Defense executives aren't just losing future deals, they're losing a market they believed was permanent. And unlike consumer boycotts or trade disputes, defense procurement doesn't snap back. Once a military standardizes on a platform, it stays there for decades. Interoperability, training pipelines, doctrine, everything locks in. Europe understood that leverage perfectly. This wasn't luck, it was strategy. While Washington focused on tariffs and loyalty tests, Europe focused on offering something more valuable: respect, predictability, and partnership without dominance. Canada responded accordingly. The contrast is even sharper when you look at who failed. The United Kingdom tried to access SAFE but refused to meet the financial commitment. London wanted flexibility without cost. Europe declined. Canada paid. Canada committed. Canada entered. The message was unmistakable. Half measures don't work anymore. You either accept American primacy entirely or you build alternatives. Canada chose the second path. What makes this shift truly dangerous for Washington isn't the money, it's the assumptions it breaks. NORAD has functioned for nearly 70 years on the premise of shared systems and shared trust. If Canada's aircraft, sensors, and communications shift toward European standards, interoperability becomes complicated, not impossible, but no longer automatic. That matters most in the Arctic. As climate change opens northern shipping routes and resource access, Arctic security becomes central to global strategy. For decades, the United States assumed Arctic defense was a joint responsibility with Canada. But what happens when Canada aligns more closely with Nordic states than with Washington, Norway, Sweden, Finland, countries with deep Arctic expertise and European defense integration? That shift would reshape planning for half a century. The economic effects extend far beyond defense headquarters. When Canada buys American systems, the spending doesn't stop at delivery. It flows into communities, engineers, technicians, training facilities. Entire towns built around defense manufacturing depend on Canadian contracts. Those ripple effects are now at risk. Border states feel it first: Michigan, Minnesota, New York, Vermont, North Dakota. These regions already watched Canadian consumers pull back from cross-border spending. Now they're seeing something far worse: long-term industrial relationships being rebuilt without them. One defense analyst put it bluntly: consumer anger fades, supply chains don't. The deeper lesson is uncomfortable. Political leaders often calculate the economic cost of tariffs. They rarely calculate the cost of contempt. Insults are treated as free. Applause is immediate. Consequences feel abstract. Canada just proved they aren't. A joke about annexation turned into a defense realignment. A rally punchline turned into tens of billions in lost contracts. A belief that allies had no choice turned into proof that they do. This moment isn't just about Canada or Europe. It's about the post-war order itself. For 80 years, American leadership rested on strength and reliability. Allies accepted U.S. dominance because it came with stability. When that stability vanished, alternatives emerged. America isn't losing influence because it became weaker. It's losing influence because it made itself optional. That's what Moscow and Beijing are watching most closely. Not the contracts, not the aircraft. The precedent. If America's closest ally can pivot away, anyone can. Mark Carney has returned from Brussels. European and Canadian firms are already submitting joint bids. Planning groups are forming. Institutional ties are being embedded. These are not gestures, they are structures. And structures are hard to dismantle once built. Meanwhile, Washington continues to insist nothing has changed, that Canada will return. That size guarantees loyalty. History suggests otherwise. Power isn't just about scale, it's about trust. And once trust is broken, it doesn't come back on command. The empty seat at the defense table once belonged to the United States. It's occupied now, and every day it stays filled, the harder it becomes to reclaim.